How long? The question sliced through the air like a blade, silencing the crowded anniversary party as Faduma, elegant in red, faced her husband Gregory with eyes wide in betrayal. For those of you just joining us, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments. Many guessed this would be a story of love, of resilience, but few could have predicted the chaos that would unravel the moment a 3-year-old girl called the wrong man Daddy. Was it a slip of the tongue, or a glimpse into a secret life built behind Faduma's back? You won't believe the twists that follow as this perfect marriage explodes in front of 20 stunned guests. Stick around, because this is only the beginning. Subscribe to our channel so you don't miss the full story and share where you're watching from. We're diving into betrayal, revenge, and a woman's quiet plan to reclaim everything. The laughter in the garden was soft and golden, like the sunlight trickling through the string lights overhead, weaving warmth into every corner of the Patterson estate. Friends clinked champagne glasses, servers in white past canapes, and soft jazz curled through the air like a slow exhale. Faduma stood near the long table draped in cream linen, her red silk gown catching the breeze just enough to make her feel, if only briefly, weightless. She glanced around at the crowd of 20 or so guests, old college friends, family from both coasts, Gregory's colleagues in tailored suits, and thought, not for the first time that evening, we made it. 10 years of marriage, of trying and failing and trying again. And here they were, celebrating as if nothing in the world could touch them. Then it happened. Daddy! The sound was clear, unmistakable, slicing through the music and chatter with all the subtlety of a scream. Faduma blinked, her smile frozen, and slowly turned. From across the garden, a small girl no more than 3 years old came hurtling forward with reckless joy, her curls bouncing and arms stretched wide, aiming straight for Gregory. The man in question froze, champagne glass in hand, color draining from his face as he instinctively knelt and scooped the child into his arms in one smooth, practiced motion. Faduma watched, rooted to the ground, as the toddler wrapped her tiny arms around Gregory's neck with the casual ease of a child well accustomed to his embrace. And then came the part that nearly unmade her. Gregory smiled. It was brief, maybe less than a second, but it was genuine and unguarded, the kind of smile a father gave his daughter, a smile she had never seen on his face for any of the children they'd lost. The party paused like a held breath. Conversations stuttered to a halt. Champagne flutes were midair, and every eye turned toward the trio at the heart of the disruption. Faduma's gaze shifted to the little girl now nestled on Gregory's hip, her small hand fisting the fabric of his shirt as though she belonged there. And standing just behind the girl, frozen, pale, caught, was Tiffany. Faduma blinked once, then twice. Mara. The child's name drifted back to her like smoke. She had been introduced casually as Tiffany's niece, visiting for the weekend. There had been no reason to question it. No reason except now, there was every reason in the world. Gregory hadn't put the child down. He hadn't even looked at Faduma yet. How long? She hadn't meant to say it aloud, but the words ripped from her throat before she could stop them, trembling with disbelief and fury, and something dangerously close to heartbreak. The silence that followed was deafening. Gregory opened his mouth, then closed it again, his lips moving uselessly, a fish gasping in air that wouldn't come. Mara, oblivious to the firestorm she had just ignited, tucked her head against his neck and sucked her thumb. Faduma's eyes never left them. Her pulse pounded behind her ears and her knees trembled, but she stayed upright, demanding an answer with her very presence. Tiffany stepped forward. Faduma, she began, voice shaky, but the words hung limp in the air, as ineffective as a match in a storm. Faduma didn't even blink. Her gaze bore through both of them, slicing deeper with each second of silence. How long, she repeated, lower now, but no less lethal. And it was then, with the sun beginning to dip behind the treetops and casting long shadows across white linen and shattered illusions, that Tiffany finally broke. 4 years, she whispered, since after my divorce. I didn't mean... Faduma laughed. It was a sound so cold, so foreign, that several guests instinctively stepped back. 4 years. 4 years of sneaking around, of lying, of spending weekends on business or catching up while Faduma stayed home, tracking ovulation and injecting hormones into her stomach, and crying alone in bathrooms over negative pregnancy tests. Gregory finally looked at her, and in his eyes was something she couldn't bear. Pity? Regret, yes, but not enough. Never enough. Faduma's voice was calm when she spoke again, though it sliced like glass. While I was bleeding in silence, mourning children we never got to meet, you were building a family with her? Her voice didn't rise, but it cracked somewhere deep beneath the words. Using our home? Our money? Tiffany reached out a hand, but Faduma recoiled, as if even the air between them was poison. Someone dropped a glass. No one moved to pick it up. Faduma took a breath, straightened her spine, and looked around at the stunned faces surrounding them. Well, she said lightly, as though narrating a scene for a stranger. It seems our celebration has turned into a revelation. She turned her gaze back to her husband. Put her down, Gregory. Gregory hesitated, then slowly lowered Mara to the grass. The girl looked up at him, confused, and began to whimper. Tiffany darted forward to take her, but Mara clung to Gregory's leg, her tiny voice breaking. No! Daddy, stay! And that was the moment Faduma truly saw it. The routine of it, the familiarity. This was not a fling, not a lapse in judgment. This was a second life, one she had never been invited into, one that had thrived on her ignorance. Her hands were trembling, but she clenched them at her sides. You've humiliated me in front of everyone I love, she said quietly, but you haven't broken me. Not yet. The party, if it could still be called that, was in ruins, yet no one left. No one could. They were watching something monumental unfold, like a car crash you couldn't look away from, like a queen burning her castle to the ground. And Faduma, the woman in red at the heart of the fire, was just getting started. Faduma moved like a ghost through the remnants of the party, her heels silent against the stone path, her fingers grazing the edge of the tablecloth as though trying to anchor herself to something real. The glasses were still half full, the candles still burning softly in their glass holders, but the laughter was gone, replaced by a brittle, stunned silence that clung to every guest like smoke after a fire. From the far end of the garden, she heard Tiffany murmuring to Mara, trying to coax the girl into letting go of Gregory's shirt. But the child clung tighter, as though the chaos around her meant nothing compared to the one person she believed was hers. The illusion was crumbling. Every memory, every neatly framed photo lining the hallway, every anniversary gift and whispered promise, they all cracked under the weight of what had just been revealed. Faduma's mind raced back to the subtle clues she had ignored. The last-minute business trips Gregory had taken always overlapped with Tiffany's sudden absences. The hushed phone calls behind closed doors, the photos she'd seen in Tiffany's phone, just a man's hand resting on a child's shoulder, fingers she'd assumed belonged to a new boyfriend. Her best friend was keeping secret. It had never occurred to her that the hand could belong to her husband. She stopped by the champagne table and stared at the bottle Gregory had insisted on getting. Our anniversary deserves something special, he'd said. Now it felt like a joke. All of it did. The flowers, the music, the way he'd kissed her cheek that morning, like nothing in the world was amiss. It hadn't just been infidelity. It had been a performance. A meticulous, slow-burning betrayal that had unfolded while she'd smiled through dinner parties and comforted Tiffany through her so-called divorce. Faduma turned and caught the eye of her cousin Amina, standing stiffly near the hedge, her expression unreadable. Faduma gave her a nod, a signal that said, "I'm still here. I'm not done." She walked back into the center of the garden where Gregory still stood, his hands awkwardly at his sides now that Mara had been pried off him. Tiffany hovered behind him, mascara streaking down her pale cheeks, her dress wrinkled, her composure shattered. But it was Faduma whose presence silenced the crowd again, not with theatrics, but with precision. "I want to know everything," she said, her voice clear despite the tremble beneath it. "Every lie, every omission, every goddamn time you walked through our door and pretended you hadn't just come from hers." She was no longer speaking just to Gregory. Her eyes burned through both of them, sweeping over Tiffany like a judgment too long deferred. Tiffany stammered something unintelligible, but Gregory stepped forward. It started after Tiffany's divorce, he said, his voice raw, his gaze locked somewhere near Faduma's shoulder, as if he couldn't bear to meet her eyes. She was in a dark place. I was trying to help her. One night, it just happened. The words fell like stones, flat and cold. One night, Faduma repeated, her lip curling. That little girl is 3. And you just said 4 years. This wasn't a night, Gregory. This was a lifetime. One you built behind my back. Gregory looked at Tiffany, who wiped her face and stepped forward with a desperate smile that looked more like a grimace. We didn't plan it, Faduma. We never meant for it to go this far. But when I got pregnant, Faduma's head tilted slowly, dangerously. You didn't tell me. You didn't say a word. You let me cry in your arms about infertility, about how broken I felt. And all that time you were growing a child in secret? The guests were no longer just observers. They were prisoners of the scene, bound by the gravity of what they were witnessing. No one moved. No one even pretended to look away. I couldn't bring myself to say it, Tiffany whispered. You were going through so much. I didn't want to hurt you. Faduma's laugh was brittle. So you thought keeping it from me would spare me pain? You watched me break myself apart trying to become a mother while your daughter was calling my husband daddy in private. That wasn't kindness. That was cruelty. Gregory finally raised his eyes. I didn't know how to stop it. Once Mara was born, it just got more complicated. I couldn't walk away from her. Faduma crossed her arms, holding herself together. But you could walk away from me. Every time you lied, you left me behind. And now you've dragged me into the ruins with you. She looked at the crowd again. Family, friends, colleagues, all watching as her life unraveled thread by thread. Then she looked back at Gregory. This is what you wanted, isn't it? For it to come out. Maybe not this way, but eventually. You just didn't have the spine to do it yourself. Tiffany flinched but said nothing. I suppose I should thank you then, Faduma added bitterly, for bringing your daughter here tonight, knowing what she might say. This wasn't an accident. It was a reveal, a curtain call. You wanted the truth out, but you didn't want to say it, so you let a child do it for you. Gregory tried to speak, but Faduma held up her hand, silencing him. Her voice dropped, but the weight of it only deepened. You've taken everything from me, my trust, my future, the image I had of my life. But you don't get to take my dignity. And with that, she turned away, not toward the house, not toward isolation, but back toward the table, where she calmly lifted her glass and raised it slightly to the stunned crowd. Drink up, she said, her voice steady, commanding. It's not every day you witness a marriage end in real time. No one moved at first, but slowly, one by one, guests began to lift their glasses with trembling hands, unsure whether they were offering a toast or mourning the death of a lie. Faduma drained her glass and placed it down with care. The show was over, but the reckoning had only just begun. The garden smelled of roses, grilled lamb, and deceit. Somewhere behind the thrum of blood in her ears, Faduma could still hear the soft croon of the jazz quartet, the clinking of silverware, the whisper of wind across white tablecloths. But none of it mattered now. She stood in the center of it all, like the eye of a hurricane, calm on the surface while everything around her spun wildly out of control. Gregory and Tiffany had retreated to opposite ends of the lawn, like guilty children caught in the middle of a collapsing stage play, yet neither dared to leave. Not yet. Faduma's body was upright, but her mind reeled. She could feel eyes darting toward her, then away again, some laced with pity, others flickering with shame, but most simply frozen in horror. She'd invited these people to witness her joy, her resilience, her journey through struggle to celebration, and instead, they were now bearing witness to the death of everything she thought she knew. But still, she would not give them the ending they expected. No screaming, no shattered glasses, no tearful retreat up the stairs. Not yet. She turned slowly and faced the guests with the composure of a woman stepping onto a podium. Please, she said, her voice smooth and sharp as crystal. Don't let this ruin your evening. There's food, wine, music. You came here for a celebration, so let's not disappoint. Her tone was gracious, but her eyes dared anyone to disobey her. It was a surreal command, and yet something in her certainty compelled them. Guests glanced at each other, awkwardly repositioned their stances, and a few reached for their drinks as though they'd been permitted to breathe again. The string quartet, after exchanging uncertain glances, began to play once more, a soft instrumental version of a love song that now sounded like a cruel joke. Gregory stepped forward, his voice low. "Faduma, this doesn't have to be—" But she cut him off with a look so cold it nearly stopped his words mid-air. "You've said enough," she replied, and he fell silent. She walked toward the buffet table where platters of food sat untouched, their colors bright and mocking beneath the hanging lights. Faduma picked up a small plate, filled it with shrimp skewers and couscous as if nothing had happened, and moved to a nearby table, lowering herself into a seat with the same grace she had at the start of the evening. Around her, hesitant laughter resumed, the kind of nervous sound people make when pretending things are fine. A few guests sat. Others remained standing, trapped in a limbo of uncertainty. Tiffany hovered nearby, watching Mara sip juice at the children's table, her hands twisting the hem of her dress into tight knots. Faduma caught her eye for a moment, just long enough to ensure the other woman saw the message in her stare. "You don't get to leave until I say you do." It was not vengeance that held her there. It was power. And for the first time in years, Faduma held all of it. She listened to fragments of conversations around her. Thin, awkward attempts at normalcy. Someone asked about the wine. Someone else made a joke about garden parties. And yet, beneath every word was the tremor of tension, a waiting silence that threatened to break at any second. She could feel Gregory pacing behind her like a trapped animal, caught between fight and flight, but unwilling to face the storm he'd caused. Then Mara's voice rang out again, small, innocent, piercing. "Daddy, I want to go home." Faduma's hand tightened around her fork. The word home echoed, a cruel reminder that this child already had one. Not with her, never with her. Tiffany scooped Mara into her arms, whispering something too soft to hear, and began edging toward the garden gate. Faduma stood. "Wait." Everyone turned. "You don't get to leave," Faduma said, her voice like velvet draped over steel. "You brought her here. You let her speak. So you will stay, and you will watch as the fantasy collapses under your feet." Tiffany froze, her face flushed red with shame and panic, but she obeyed, returning to her place near the hedge. Gregory took a step forward. "Faduma, what do you want me to do?" Her smile was slow and precise. "I want you to stand still, just like I did when you lied to my face for 4 years. I want you to watch me carry the weight of your choices in front of the people you once called friends." Her tone never rose. She didn't need to shout. Every word was a scalpel. She returned to her seat and took another bite of her food, ignoring the murmurs around her. She was aware of every twitch, every sideways glance, every forced laugh. But most of all, she was aware of the shifting tone. People no longer seeing her as the pitied wife, but as something sharper, someone terrifyingly composed amid the ruin. One guest, a woman from Gregory's office, stood and said awkwardly, "Faduma, maybe this isn't the right time. We could come back another day." Faduma's gaze was unwavering. "No, if I have to sit through this, so do all of you. You celebrated the idea of us. Now you'll witness the reality." The woman sank back into her chair, cheeks flushed. Minutes passed. The party continued in its surreal state, half real, half nightmare. Faduma drank her wine slowly, letting it settle in her throat like the burn of survival. She said little, but her presence commanded the entire space. Neither Gregory nor Tiffany moved again. They simply stood, forced to bear the unraveling as she orchestrated it with silent precision. By the time the moon had fully risen, the last note of the quartet faded and the candles flickered low. Faduma finally stood again. "Now," she said, her voice like closing steel doors. "You may all go. That includes you, Gregory, and you, Tiffany." They didn't argue. They simply left, Gregory guiding Tiffany and Mara through the side gate, their footsteps barely audible against the gravel. Faduma remained, standing alone in the center of the wreckage, the last guest at her funeral. And yet, in the stillness that followed, She did not feel broken. She felt dangerous. The house was too quiet, the kind of silence that doesn't soothe, but amplifies every sound, every creak in the floorboards, every drip of condensation from the kitchen faucet, every heartbeat pounding against ribs like a protest. Faduma sat on the edge of the velvet armchair in the living room, her red dress wrinkled and stained with the shadows of a night that had gone to war with her dignity. The guests were gone, the candles blown out, the scent of rose water and grilled meat already fading beneath the sharp tang of betrayal. She didn't hear Gregory enter, but she felt him. The air shifted slightly, like the moment before a storm breaks open, and when she looked up, he was standing in the doorway, rumpled, pale, still in his party suit, but with none of the charm he'd worn just hours earlier. He looked older now, not just in body but in the slump of his shoulders, in the way his eyes refused to meet hers until she forced them to. She didn't ask him to sit, and he didn't assume the right. "You waited," she said, her voice low, raw, but clear. "You could have left, taken your daughter, your mistress, your guilt, and vanished. But you stayed." Gregory swallowed hard, shifting his weight like a man trying to balance on cracked ice. "Because I owe you the truth," he said, and it sounded almost like an apology, except it wasn't nearly enough. Faduma leaned back slightly, folding her arms with deliberate calm. "Then tell it, all of it, because I'm done guessing." He nodded slowly, then ran a hand over his jaw as if trying to gather the courage to unpeel the layers of deceit he'd wrapped himself in for years. "It started small," he said. "After Derek left Tiffany, she was falling apart. She'd call late at night, crying. I thought I was helping her, just being a friend. But then the calls turned into visits. And one night, I didn't come home." Faduma blinked once. "That was the weekend I thought you'd missed your flight, the one where you came back smelling like vanilla and lies." Gregory winced, the memory cutting deeper than he expected. "I told myself it was a mistake. I would fix it. But then she found out she was pregnant. And everything changed. She wanted to keep it. Said she didn't expect anything from me. But I couldn't turn away. I didn't want to be the man who abandoned his child." Faduma felt something cold coil around her ribs. "So instead, you chose to be the man who abandoned his wife. Quietly. Piece by piece." He looked stricken, but she didn't stop. "I gave you everything, Gregory. My loyalty, my body, my faith that when I was falling apart inside, you were still beside me. And all that time, you were building a secret family, while I blamed myself for every miscarriage, every empty crib." Gregory's voice cracked. "I never stopped loving you. Then why did you give her what I begged for?" Faduma's words were sharp now, biting through the stillness like broken glass. "You held Mara when she took her first steps, didn't you? You read her bedtime stories and took her to the zoo and kissed her forehead when she cried. All those moments I ached to give a child. You gave them to someone else's." He didn't answer because there was nothing he could say that wouldn't sound like cruelty. Faduma stood slowly and walked toward the fireplace, where a wedding photo still sat in a silver frame. She picked it up and stared at it, the image of two smiling people who had no idea what storm awaited them. "You used our savings, didn't you? Paid for her rent, her hospital bills, her daycare? With our money." Gregory hesitated for a long moment before nodding. "I kept it separate. I didn't use anything you personally." "Don't," she snapped. "Don't you dare try to make this clean. There is no version of this where you come out untarnished. You lied to me in my bed. You built two lives and let me starve in one while you thrived in the other." His voice was quiet now, nearly pleading. "I thought I could manage it, that I could be there for both of you, and eventually, maybe things would balance out." Faduma turned to face him, the photo still in her hand. "You didn't manage anything. You just delayed the wreckage long enough to pretend it wasn't coming. But now it's here, and you don't get to hide behind good intentions anymore." Gregory lowered himself into the chair across from hers, finally looking her in the eyes without flinching. "I know you'll never forgive me. I wouldn't ask you to. But I need you to understand. I never wanted to hurt you. I was weak. I let it happen. And now I have to live with what I've done." Faduma stared at him for a long time, not with hatred, but with the kind of detached clarity that comes when the wound is no longer bleeding, but turning into scar. "You're wrong," she said finally. "You didn't let it happen. You built it, carefully, brick by brick, and you thought you were so clever that no one would notice the second foundation you were laying beneath our feet." She set the photo back on the mantel, straighter than before, then turned away. "I'm not asking you to explain anymore. I just needed to hear you say it, to confirm that I wasn't crazy, that the gut instincts I buried to protect us were right all along." He nodded again, slowly this time, as if something inside him had finally given way. But Faduma was already walking toward the stairs, her back straight, her steps sure. "You should leave tonight," she said over her shoulder, "because tomorrow I start cleaning up this mess, and I don't plan to leave a single piece of it behind." Gregory stood but didn't follow her. He watched her disappear down the hall, swallowed by the same silence she had emerged from. And for the first time, he realized the truth was no longer the thing that might save him. It was the very thing that would bury him. The guest room smelled like Gregory. Faduma hadn't stepped inside it for years, not since they'd finished converting it into a reading room she rarely had time to use. But now it served a new purpose, a temporary holding cell for the man who once shared her bed, her dreams, and her secrets. The man who had, until hours ago, played the part of devoted husband while quietly nurturing another life that had no space for her. She stood in the doorway, arms folded, watching as he zipped up a bag with the kind of slow deliberation reserved for endings. He didn't look at her at first, perhaps unsure if her presence meant permission or another interrogation, but she didn't need to speak. Her silence was the gravity dragging every movement down. Finally, Gregory turned, his face pale in the half-light. "I'll go," he said, and she nodded once, a gesture that cost her more than she would ever admit. But instead of leaving, he sat on the edge of the bed and ran a hand through his hair. "There's something else," he added, almost a whisper. "I didn't tell you everything last night." Faduma didn't flinch. "Of course you didn't. You've practiced omission so long it probably feels like breathing." His lips parted as if to argue, but then he simply nodded. "You're right." He exhaled, long and slow. It wasn't just money or time. It was moments. Faduma stayed still, but her pulse quickened. She had known it, of course, had felt it like a splinter just beneath the skin. But hearing him say it was something else entirely. "I was there when Mara took her first steps," he said, eyes distant. "It was early morning. Tiffany called, panicked, saying the baby stood on her own, then stumbled toward her. I rushed over. She fell right into me the second time. She called me Dada the same day." Faduma swallowed hard, the air thick and bitter in her lungs. That same month, she remembered sobbing in the doctor's office after her third failed IUI attempt, Gregory's hand squeezing hers tightly, his face etched with concern. Now she realized that while she mourned what could never be, he was elsewhere, celebrating what already was. "She had a little birthday party," Gregory continued, not daring to look at her. "Just a few of Tiffany's friends. I brought the cake, pink frosting. I bought her this ridiculous stuffed lion that roared when you hugged it. She wouldn't let go of it for weeks." Faduma's fingernails dug into her arms, sharp crescents of fury pressing into her skin. "So while I was writing letters to a child I couldn't have," she said slowly, "you were making memories with one you never told me about. While I counted days between hormone injections, you were counting candles on her cake." Gregory looked up, and for the first time in days he didn't speak, because there was nothing left that didn't sound grotesque. "You didn't just cheat on me, Gregory," she continued, her voice low and blistering. "You stole from me. You robbed me of moments I would have given anything for, and you handed them, gift-wrapped, to a woman who smiled in my face and whispered secrets into yours." He pressed his palms to his face, the shame clinging to him like sweat. "I know," he said, muffled behind his hands. "I was living two lives, but only one of them ever felt real." Faduma's eyes narrowed. "Then why did you keep pretending this one mattered? Why marry me, sleep beside me, help me paint a nursery we never got to use, if you knew you'd already filled that role somewhere else?" He dropped his hands and looked at her. "Because I loved you, I still do. I never stopped. But I also—" He paused, searching for words that wouldn't betray him further. "I also loved being needed. Tiffany made me feel essential. You were always so strong, so complete, even in your grief. With her, I got to feel like a savior. Faduma stared at him, stunned by the cruelty hidden within his honesty. So you punished me for not being broken enough? She asked. You gave the best parts of yourself to the woman who needed rescuing, and saved your hollow shell for the one who stood by you through everything? Gregory didn't answer. He couldn't. She stepped closer then, not to forgive, not to comfort, but to burn the distance between them with truth. I carried this marriage. I softened myself to fit your needs, bent over backwards to keep the house warm, the bed open, the future bright, all while you disappeared behind business trips and secrets. And now, standing here, you still think love excuses the architecture of betrayal? He looked shattered, but Faduma no longer cared. You kept her hidden, Gregory, she said, but it's the memories you shared with her that scream the loudest. Because now, every moment we spent together, every anniversary, every fight, every reconciliation, feels counterfeit. Gregory reached into his duffel and pulled out a small photo. He hesitated before extending it to her. I kept this in my wallet, he said. It was from the zoo, Mara on my shoulders. She had cotton candy in one hand and sunglasses too big for her face. She called me her favorite person that day. Faduma took the photo with fingers that trembled, not from weakness, but from rage held on a leash. She studied it, Mara's smile wide and untroubled, Gregory's eyes crinkled with joy she hadn't seen in years. The image was harmless to an outsider, but to her it was a blade. You brought this into our home, she whispered. You carried this next to my picture, didn't you? Like they could both coexist without bleeding into each other. He opened his mouth, but she didn't let him speak. Instead, she tore the photo in two, clean, swift, precise, and dropped the pieces onto the floor between them. No more half-truths, she said. No more double lives. This house will not bear both our ghosts and hers. And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving Gregory alone with the shards of a memory he once thought he could protect. But some memories, like lies, are meant to be broken. The morning light broke through the windows with a brutal honesty, illuminating dust motes in the air and casting long shadows across the polished floorboards of Faduma's kitchen. She stood barefoot, coffee growing cold in her hands, staring at the wall where their wedding photo used to hang. It was gone now, taken down in the quiet hours after Gregory left, when the house was still and heavy with the weight of what had been unearthed. The silence was no longer mournful. It was strategic, charged with a new energy humming beneath her skin. She wasn't grieving anymore. She was calculating. She opened her laptop with slow precision, the hum of the machine rising like the beat of a war drum. On the screen, their joint accounts flickered to life, savings, investments, and credit cards. It took her less than 10 minutes to transfer every liquid asset with her name on it into a secured personal account. Another 10 to freeze the joint credit line. Gregory had played husband and father in two different lives using shared resources, and now she would make sure he paid for every cent spent in silence. The legal consultation was already scheduled. She'd found the firm at midnight, eyes dry, spine straight, fingers typing with the mechanical calm of a woman no longer willing to be collateral. The senior partner she chose specialized in high-asset divorce litigation and marital fraud. There would be no gentle mediation, no therapy recommendation, or polite request for fairness. This was war, and Faduma had no intention of leaving the battlefield without taking back every piece of herself he had divided. As she closed her banking apps and began compiling years' worth of statements, her phone vibrated with a notification. Instagram. She hesitated before checking, then opened the app. Tiffany had posted a photo. The image was blurry but deliberate. Mara's tiny hand holding Gregory's. The caption read, "No one understands the full story. We are just trying to protect our daughter from hate." Below it, the comments exploded with sympathy. Friends offering support, strangers condemning unnamed attackers, and a steady stream of hearts and praying hand emojis. Faduma's jaw tightened. She scrolled further, finding another post from earlier that morning, a black and white portrait of Tiffany, eyes red but soft, with the words, "When love is complicated, don't judge. Pray." Tiffany wasn't hiding. She wasn't ashamed. She was already painting herself as the victim, draping herself in grief like a veil, weaponizing motherhood and heartache in equal measure. The betrayal shifted in her stomach, no longer sharp but molten. Faduma opened a new document on her desktop and began a timeline. Names, dates, locations, transactions, receipts. She included everything Gregory had admitted and the lies he had yet to confess. She wasn't doing this just for legal grounds. She was building a record, a weapon, something cold and irrefutable. Because if Tiffany wanted to manipulate perception, Faduma would counter with undeniable facts. By the time her lawyer called, she had a folder with everything from daycare receipts billed under their joint Amex to emails confirming Gregory's business hotel stays, dates that lined up with Tiffany's sudden disappearances from Faduma's life. Her lawyer didn't gasp, didn't blink. She simply said, "We'll subpoena the rest, and we'll freeze his access to the house, the car, the remaining accounts. You're not just entitled to half, you're entitled to justice." As the call ended, another message arrived, this one from Gregory. It was long, riddled with apologies, pleas, and words like co-parenting and compassion, phrases that tasted like poison in her mouth. But at the bottom, it was Tiffany who added a note. "Please don't drag Mara into this. She's just a child. Let's rise above the drama for her sake." Faduma read it twice. Then she screenshotted the entire thread, dropped it into her growing file, and didn't reply. Rising above was the privilege of the unscathed. The next step was the locks. The locksmith arrived that afternoon, a quiet man in a navy jumpsuit who didn't ask questions. When he was done, she handed him cash and thanked him with a nod. Gregory wouldn't be walking through that door again, not without consequences. By evening, she had printed the legal separation draft, scheduled a meeting with a forensic accountant, and spoken with her HR department about shifting direct deposit accounts. She wasn't moving out. She wasn't hiding. This house, this life, he had tried to claim it with lies, but now she was taking it back with truth. Room by room, dollar by dollar. It wasn't until she sat down at the dining table, now cleared of champagne and betrayal, that she finally allowed herself a moment of stillness. Not to cry, not to rage, but to breathe, to feel the terrifying power of certainty settle into her bones. She had thought she needed a child to feel whole. She had thought she needed Gregory to feel protected. But here she was, exposed, stripped bare, and still unbroken. Across the table, the vase of red roses from the night before had wilted, their petals sagging under their weight. Faduma stood and carried them to the trash, watching them disappear beneath coffee grounds and eggshells. Beautiful things could rot quickly, but they could also be replaced. As she turned back toward the living room, her phone buzzed again. A friend. One of the few who hadn't just whispered apologies but had shown up. The message was simple. "Whatever you need, I've got you." Faduma smiled. She no longer needed comfort. She needed a strategy. And this time, she wasn't playing defense. The game had changed. And now she was the one holding the pieces. The coffee shop was tucked between a dry cleaner and a florist. The kind of place where no one asked questions and no one cared who you were, as long as you tipped and kept your voice low. Faduma chose the back booth by instinct, away from the windows, close to the wall, where the ambient noise could muffle anything worth keeping private. She stirred her espresso without drinking it, eyes locked on the door, waiting for a man she never thought she'd reach out to. But desperation and strategy often wore the same face, and she was done playing fair in a rigged game. Derek entered 5 minutes late, sunglasses still on, coat zipped too high for the mild weather. He looked like a man both exhausted and indifferent, like someone who'd lost more than he could count and had stopped pretending he could get any of it back. Faduma watched him approach, noting the careful way he scanned the room, the practiced detachment in his shoulders. He sat across from her without a word, and for a long moment neither of them spoke. "I almost didn't come," Derek said finally, his voice as dry as the espresso she still hadn't touched. "I wouldn't have blamed you if you didn't," Faduma replied. "But I'm glad you did." He removed his sunglasses, revealing eyes shadowed not just by fatigue, but by something older. Disgust, maybe, or shame. "I figured it was about Tiffany, not many other reasons you'd want to meet me." Faduma gave a sharp, humorless smile. "She's the only reason we're both divorced, or nearly." Seems fitting we compare notes. Derek exhaled through his nose, half laugh, half snarl. What's left to compare? She takes. That's what she does. She finds the cracks in good men and convinces them they were born broken. And when they leave everything for her, she drains them until there's nothing left to admire. Faduma tilted her head. So you don't believe she loved Gregory? Of course she did, he said bitterly. She loved what he gave her, what he risked for her. But she never loved him for who he was, just for what he made her feel. Wanted, innocent, justified. The bitterness in his voice was so familiar, it sent a chill down her spine. They weren't allies by choice, only by fallout, bound together by the damage one woman had left in her wake. But allies nonetheless. I need proof, Faduma said plainly. Not just for court, for truth. She's already painting me as the villain online. She's using her daughter like a shield while casting herself as some sanctified single mother betrayed by the world. And people are buying it. Derek reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a USB drive, dropping it on the table without flourish. You're not the first. You won't be the last. That's texts, screenshots, and voice memos she accidentally left on our shared iCloud. She said the same things to me that she probably said to Gregory, about how no one understood her, about how her friend, meaning you, was so strong it was exhausting, about how she deserved better. Faduma stared at the drive, the way someone might regard a loaded gun left casually between teacups. Why keep it all? Because I knew one day someone else would need it. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. She thrives when people don't talk, when the wives stay embarrassed and the husbands stay weak. She's not just a woman who made a mistake. She's a woman who builds her power on silence. You break that silence. You take her power. Faduma reached for the drive, sliding it into her purse without a word. Her hand trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer pressure of knowing this could finally shift the narrative. Facts, not feelings. Receipts, not rumors. She had what Tiffany feared most, clarity. She played the long game, Faduma murmured. She smiled at me while stealing from my table. She hugged me after my miscarriages and went home to rock my husband's child to sleep. Derek's jaw clenched, a twitch of fury passing through his otherwise measured expression. She told me you'd never survive motherhood, that you were too independent, too career-focused, that Gregory would thank her someday for giving him what you couldn't. Faduma's eyes darkened. She said that? He nodded. And she meant it. She didn't just want your husband. She wanted your life. Then she wanted to watch it crumble while she stepped into the space where you used to stand. The words rang too true. Suddenly everything fit. The subtle digs Tiffany used to make about balance and femininity, the way she overpraised Gregory in front of her, even the moments she insisted on helping with their finances. Tiffany hadn't stumbled into an affair. She'd mapped it like a thief casing a vault. I'm going to use this, Faduma said, in court, in public. Everywhere she's tried to reshape this story, I'll bury her with her own words. Derek finished his coffee, eyes cold. Good. She's built a reputation on charm. Time someone made her choke on it. They sat in silence for a few more minutes. There was nothing warm between them, no shared empathy, no healing words. But what pulsed between them was sharper, more effective. Strategy, truth, revenge as precision. As Derek stood to leave, he looked back at her once more. Don't hesitate. She only thrives in hesitation. Faduma nodded. I won't. And when she finally stepped out into the afternoon sun, USB in her purse and clarity in her spine, she realized something she hadn't dared admit until now. She wasn't surviving anymore. She was preparing to win. The first morning in her new apartment was quieter than expected. No sounds of Gregory shuffling around the kitchen, no soft buzz of a phone vibrating with excuses, no child's laughter, no ghosts, just the gentle hum of the city waking outside her window and the rhythmic pulse of her breath, steady and whole. Faduma wrapped her hands around a cup of strong coffee and stepped onto the small balcony, letting the sunlight fall across her skin like a promise. The sky was streaked with gold, as if the world itself understood she had survived something meant to shatter her. It hadn't been clean, and it certainly hadn't been quick. The court hearings had stretched longer than expected, dragged down by Gregory's pleas for shared assets and Tiffany's endless parade of moral posturing. But Faduma had come armed with Derek's files, her lawyer's precision, and the unshakable calm of a woman who had already lost everything and refused to lose again. By the end of it, the judge had called Tiffany's behavior a pattern of manipulation and Gregory's actions a gross breach of marital trust. The court didn't just award Faduma financial independence, it acknowledged in black and white judgment that her pain had been real and her strength exceptional. She kept the house, though she didn't want it anymore. She'd sold it 3 days after the divorce was finalized, watched the real estate agent remove the for sale sign with practiced detachment, and walked away without looking back. The money went into a new business account under her name only, seed capital for a consultancy she'd been too afraid to start when married. Now it felt like breath, like something hers, not borrowed or bartered in silence. Tiffany had tried to control the online narrative, but screenshots didn't lie. And once Derek released a few carefully curated exchanges through a discreet mutual, sympathy began to shift. People who had offered Tiffany virtual tissues and prayers began to pull back. A few sent private apologies to Faduma, and others simply deleted their old comments. It wasn't vindication in the grand public sense, but it was enough. Enough to take back the dignity that had been torn from her in front of an entire party of witnesses. Gregory, on the other hand, had faded. Word got out at his job. HR flagged the misuse of joint funds and the scandal surrounding his name. And though they didn't fire him immediately, the demotion came fast and quietly. Tiffany's ambitions soured in tandem. Derek won partial custody of Mara, and rumors swirled that Tiffany had lost her teaching license after certain screenshots raised ethical red flags. Faduma didn't celebrate it, but she didn't grieve it either. It was simply justice doing its slow, steady work. Now, here in this new space with clean walls and no memories, Faduma sat down at her desk, opened her laptop, and reviewed her itinerary. A flight to London at the end of the week. A creative strategy firm had offered her a 6-month contract, impressed by her insight and grace under fire, unaware that the fire was the exact crucible that made her this sharp. She'd said yes without blinking, because she was done shrinking herself to fit the frame of someone else's life. Later that evening, she met Marcus at a quiet bistro, tucked beneath ivy-draped walls. She hadn't expected to feel anything so soon, hadn't even been looking, but he had appeared quietly in her life, not with promises or charm, but with presence. He never tried to fix her or ask her to move faster than she wanted. He just showed up. And when she told him everything about Gregory, Tiffany, and Mara, he hadn't looked at her with pity or discomfort. He'd simply said, "You are not the woman they tried to define. You are the one who rewrote the story." They didn't talk about love, not yet, but they talked about plans, about books and food and the absurdity of algorithmic dating. He made her laugh, and not in the distracted way she used to perform joy for Gregory's benefit, but a full-bodied laugh, the kind that starts in your ribs and doesn't ask for permission. After dinner, she returned home and found a package waiting on her doorstep. No name, just a plain envelope taped to the top. Inside was a drawing, crayon lines and uneven colors, but the message was unmistakable. A picture of Faduma standing beside a little girl with curly hair and green eyes, both of them smiling beneath a big sun. In a child's careful scrawl, the words read, "Miss Faduma is nice, I remember." Mara. She sat on the couch for a long while, the drawing pressed to her chest, heart heavy but no longer aching. There was no forgiveness in her, not for Gregory, not for Tiffany, but there was room for this, for a child caught between lies and innocence. She would never claim Mara, and Mara would never be hers. But the memory of that child clinging to Gregory at the party had shifted, not as a symbol of betrayal, but of clarity. Mara had never lied. Only the adults had. In the end, Faduma didn't need revenge to feel free. She didn't need an apology scrawled in desperation or the satisfaction of watching Tiffany fall. What she needed, what she claimed, was this: silence on her terms, space built with her own hands, a future not anchored in betrayal, but in bold, undeniable choice. As the night stretched its arms across the city, she opened the balcony door, letting the cool breeze kiss her skin. She was no longer defined by the worst thing that happened to her. She was represented by what she chose after. And what she chose, without apology, was everything. Thank you for staying with us through this powerful and emotional journey. If Faduma's story moved you, challenged you, or made you reflect, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters here. Make sure to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more real, raw, and unforgettable stories like this one. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their strength and let us know where you're watching from. Until next time, stay bold, stay honest, and we'll see you in the next chapter.